Global urgency on sustainable solutions, digitally connected infrastructure, and rapidly advancing novel technologies has ushered aerospace into an exciting period of innovation, arguably not experienced since the dawn of aviation. Join us as we explore today's dynamic industry with distinguished visionaries, changemakers, policy creators, and the innovative ideas that are cultivating new frontiers across aviation, space, and defense. This is Wheels Up, the future of flight, with Alex Ramirez.
Welcome to our latest episode of Wheels Up, Future of Flight. I'm your host, Alex Ramirez, President, Collinear Group. It's an incredible time in aviation, space, and defense as the industry reimagines itself with new and novel technologies in areas like sustainable aviation, advanced air mobility, and commercial space travel. Hydrogen-powered aircraft is one of the most promising long-term solutions to reducing carbon emission in air travel. Many believe the case already exists for transforming the industry infrastructure to suit a hydrogen and hybrid hydrogen electric future for the sector. But building a very different hydrogen infrastructure and economy will involve facing a significant number of technological challenges. Today, we're joined by Max Mankin, co-founder and CTO of Modern Hydrogen, an energy technology startup based in Seattle, Washington, whose mission is to generate cheap, scalable, and reliable hydrogen for all. Max has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Brown University with honors, a PhD in Physical Chemistry from Harvard University, where he held fellowships in both the Hertz and National Science Foundations, and is an author on over a dozen publications and an inventor on 25 plus patents and patents pending. Max was named one of Inc. magazine's most brilliant entrepreneurs under 30 in 2017, honored on the Forbes 30 under 30 list in 2016, and was recently named to the Puget Sound Business Journal 40 under 40 class of 2024. Modern Hydrogen is developing hydrogen-producing devices that are smaller, modular, and intended to decentralize applications so that hydrogen gas won't have to be shipped or piped to new locations. With no new pipes, no on-site storage, and no supply chain risks, this distributed approach to hydrogen production leverages existing reliable infrastructure to deliver the fuel of the future today. Modern Hydrogen has raised over $100 million in funding to date, backed by investors such as Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, Metaplanet Holdings, and others. Welcome, Max. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here, and I appreciate the overly flattering introduction.
It's an incredible list of career accomplishments that you have, and that's actually the first question I wanted to start with. I'll first start by congratulating you on the recent 40 under 40, recognition. Very, very well deserved. But was there a point in your career, through your studies that you realized science and technology was the career path you were going to take? I mean, was there kind of a defining moment for you?
As a kid, I've always been interested in kind of like science, tinkering, engineering. I grew up, with chemistry kits in the backyard and built a Tesla coil and almost burned down my house with it. I've always kind of been into that. It wasn't really until I was in college, though, that I started to think about how to apply that to clean energy. And I was lucky. I got this opportunity actually to work on hydrogen fuel cells. And this was kind of during what we now call Clean Tech 1.0 in the mid-2000s. And fuel cells and enhancing the catalysts in hydrogen fuel cells was a really big thing. So I got to working on that. And then I kind of got to this point where, okay, we really, I reached this point of personal satisfaction with understanding the catalyst in the fuel cell and started thinking about, okay, how does the whole fuel cell work? And then I was thinking about, okay, where do you get the hydrogen? And these questions just kind of blossomed for me into more of a systems thinking about climate change, about energy infrastructure in general. And from that point, being able to connect these microscopic details, literally, of how these catalysts work on a literal atomic molecular level to broader energy systems and the implications there and the implications on climate change, I was totally hooked by kind of the multidimensionality of that problem and how it interwove science, technology, engineering, business, people, climate, finance, and all these different elements that all have to come together to make this work.
Well, your STEM and entrepreneur passion definitely shines through, Max. With that, can you share a little bit about the genesis behind modern hydrogen? I mean, clearly, your passion and your studies weaved into that, but what was the journey and where you guys are today?
Yeah, so modern hydrogen started with a pretty clear mandate to address some of the biggest challenges in the hardest to decarbonize sectors of the economy. And ultimately, we landed on heating through a variety of twists and turns of different incarnations of startup companies, which is what happens. Kind of, we have a lean startup approach, of course, and so you test something out and it doesn't work, backtrack, test something else, and so on. Right. Pretty normal approach, but so we are effectively looking at some of the hardest areas of the economy to decarbonize, and we ended up stumbling across process heating and fuel usage as one of the most challenging ones. So we were talking with a bunch of customers who use cogeneration, which is producing heat and power on site at the same time. And you see this in like larger buildings or office parks, and a lot of cities have it as well in what's called district heating. And they were saying, hey, we think we're going to use hydrogen in the future. And to your point about infrastructure, we asked them, hey, where are you going to get it? And they said, oh, we think the utilities will bring it to us just like they bring us gas today. And we kind of looked at them and said, okay, sure. And then to check that, we asked some utilities and asked, hey, what's your plan for bringing hydrogen to these folks? And they kind of gave us this blank look or laughed us out of the room in a few cases and basically said, hey, there's no clean hydrogen today, right? So even if I wanted it, I couldn't get it. Even the small amount that I can get, I can't move in my pipes. And that's really important, right? So it's incredibly important to understand that there are 3 million miles of gas transmission line in the U.S. alone. But you can't move more than about 20% hydrogen through those pipes. So if you want to switch from heating with gas to heating with hydrogen or something like that, you just can't do it using today's infrastructure. And then, they also said, hey, even if we solve that problem, clean hydrogen is super expensive. And a lot of it comes from renewable electricity, of which there's a multi-year backlog. There's not enough. It's expensive. And so we don't even think that we can get it affordably. So we kind of looked at this and we were like, okay, hey, there's a bunch of users in, aviation, in long-haul trucking, fueling, in cogeneration and power generation, in industrial process heating in particular, so like really high-grade process heating that want hydrogen. But today's infrastructure and today's kind of gas supply companies can't get them hydrogen at a cost that's affordable, using practical means of moving it around, or without emitting a lot of CO2 to do so. And most of the hydrogen that we make today is produced in these really big centralized kind of refinery scale plants, but it emits a lot of CO2 to make hydrogen that way. And then you've got to truck it to where it's needed in what's called a tube trailer. And you can do that, but it imposes a big cost markup, about 3 to 4x cost markup to move it, a lot of extra energy required to compress it, and then you add the supply chain risk on top of that. And what we're seeing is a lot of customers just don't want to deal with that added cost, don't want to deal with that added complexity. And if they're using hydrogen as a means to decarbonize, then making hydrogen the way it's made today with steam, what's called steam methane reforming, is actually worse than just burning gas or burning diesel to begin with.
So interesting. I mean, you talk about conventional thinking, right? Utility companies will take care of it. Well, not so much. What is it that modern hydrogen is actually doing? Like, can you share a little bit about your tech and your innovative thinking to solve this problem?
Yeah, of course. So modern hydrogen effectively sells a box that strips the carbon out of gas at the end of the gas grid. So let's zoom in a little bit. So in those 3 million miles of gas distribution network that are in the ground today, gas is moving through, and that is CH4. It's mostly methane. And you see carbon attached to 4 hydrogen atoms. And so when you burn that carbon becomes CO2, and that hydrogen becomes water, H2O. What we do is we developed a process that said, hey, look, people want to be continuing to move gas using this infrastructure, but they don't want that CO2 at the end. So what we do is we have a box that sits around the gas meter, can go before, can go after, and it strips that C, that carbon, out of the gas. So you can think of it like, hey, it's a box, in comes CH4, or gas on one side, out goes hydrogen on the other, and then C, which comes out as a black solid powder, it looks like black powdered sugar, kind of feels the same way, falls into a big bucket at the bottom of the box. And then once we collect that carbon, we pick it up, say once a week, we actually put it into roads. And what's neat about this is two things. Number one, it's a solid powder, so it actually has these cool properties that enhance asphalt strength. So it will actually make asphalt stronger. And if you're driving down the highway, you'll notice, like you'll see kind of tire tracks, and that's called rutting. That's the technical term for it. And it comes from asphalt just slowly kind of compressing under the weight of heavier vehicles. And it turns out adding our carbon, we've developed some special formulations to asphalt, actually lowers the rate at which that happens. And it sequesters the carbon, maybe more importantly, right? It prevents that carbon from being burned and released as CO2 into the atmosphere. So we're both sequestering it and creating a value-add product stream with that co-product of the hydrogen. And then ultimately, the customer next to this box can take the hydrogen out of the box and use it in whatever they need. Fueling, process heating, aviation fuel, whatever use they have for the hydrogen, it's there, it's ready, and it's coming out of today's pipes, out of today's gas meter, and they get to keep using their infrastructure.
That's amazing. Talk about a real, truly sustainable ecosystem and fully, recyclable. So, is there a particular industry or sector that Modern Hydrogen is focused on as you kick off your roadmap?
Yeah, so we're focused on a few areas. Number one is gas utilities. So, gas utilities, of course, are under a lot of pressure to offer low carbon fuels to their customers. And those customers are in a variety of industries. And then we also focus on serving those end users of the hydrogen. So that's industrial process heating companies. So think people who make copper, who make steel, they need really high temperature process heat. Fueling for long haul and long distance transportation. So think, I think we're actually in pretty good shape in terms of electrifying passenger cars. But for long-haul trucking, like, when you order something on Amazon Prime and it shows up the next day, it probably comes at some point in one of these trucks. That's going to be really hard to electrify just from the energy density of batteries and the recharge time, where the truck has to maximize its time on the road versus sitting in the charging station. And so people are seriously considering hydrogen for that. We have some power generation clients who are looking to switch from a gas-based power generation to hydrogen to lower their CO2 emissions. And we have some early interest from aviation, but nothing super serious yet.
Well, since you mentioned aviation, and let's talk a little bit about the industry. I mean, hydrogen power propulsion has been showing a lot of promise. It's been creating a lot of buzz in the industry. Have you been talking to some of the big players in the sector, and what's your perspective on some of the unique challenges that you've heard from an infrastructure standpoint? Yeah,
so I think, that there are a couple ways to break down the challenges, right? One is, okay, can we make a hydrogen-powered aircraft that's safe, that's reliable, that's affordable, that runs on hydrogen? And I'll confess, I'm not really the expert there, but I have a lot of optimism that the engine developers will get there, the fuel cell developers will get there. And you see a lot of these test flights, and it seems like, from some of these leading companies, they've had a lot of success on this. But then you kind of have to think about, okay, bigger picture, what does the ecosystem look like to enable hydrogen-powered aircraft? And I think that's where we come in. So we've been talking to a few suppliers and operators about potentially putting hydrogen generators actually at airports. And this is a good opportunity because airports, of course, use a lot of fuel today. So they already have a lot of natural gas in particular coming in. And being able to convert that on site without CO2 emissions into hydrogen and then use that for fueling might be a really low cost way to provide fueling without having to move hydrogen from somewhere else. So that's one big opportunity. The challenge is that, with infrastructure, with these bigger ecosystems, and we're seeing this in long haul trucking as well, you do have a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? So, what you have to do is get these big coalitions to come together. So you need the ports, you need the aircraft OEMs, you need the engine OEMs, you need the airlines who actually operate the aircraft to all come together and then decide, hey, this is what we're going to do. Because without any one of these stakeholder buy-in, you're probably not going to tick all the boxes that you need to get a project going. And then the real challenge, I think, with aviation in particular is you've got hubs, right? And so, if you build hydrogen fueling at one spot but nowhere else, it doesn't do you any good. And so now you've really got to think about, okay, what is a really good, larger picture of solving this chicken and egg problem where we can take off the right bite-sized chunk in order to put in the infrastructure to do this in a way that we can go test it out and prove out the model, but in a way that's also sustainable and somewhat economical, because passengers probably aren't going to want to hear that their flights are going to increase in cost, 10x, say, which is what it would be today. So I think that's kind of the big strategic question that I don't think the industry has necessarily answered yet. And there are a lot of early coalitions coming together, a lot of murmurings about it. But I'm really excited to see where it goes and hopefully do our part to contribute.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of organizations, government, private, investors, innovators like yourself working together to try to go solve this very complex problem, but very much needed for the industry. Do you see a scenario, Max, where you can get like very, very close to hydrogen generation on aircraft, or as far as the airport trend? You're kind of at the cutting edge of technology in this space, and that's the big hurdle, right, that the industry needs to overcome, is how do we realistically transport hydrogen, not just to the aircraft, but on aircraft as well?
Yeah, so I think for us, the challenge would ultimately be that if you strip the carbon out of some fuel on the plane, now you're left with a bunch of carbon. And the problem is that's not as dense as the fuel itself, so you need extra volume to actually start filling up the plane with that solid kind of black powdered sugar. You certainly don't want to dump it overboard or anything like that. So for our approach, I don't think that's the right approach. I have seen approaches where you store some other fuel like water, and then you run it through an electrolyzer on board and then run that through a fuel cell. That runs into very quickly kind of energy density issues, right? Because now you need batteries and an electrolyzer and a fuel cell and the water storage. So ultimately, I do think that the most kind of economical and also energy and power dense solution for this, just from an engineering standpoint, personally, is to put the hydrogen in a tank and put that on the plane. But hey, you know what? If somebody has a different model or they have a big cavity they want to fill up with solid carbon, happy to have a chat.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting, innovative, outside the box thinking ideas, right? So one never knows. But that brings me to my next question, which is deep tech in general, right? I mean, there's just so much innovation and technology that's happening. All these startups across these incredibly difficult engineering challenges around the world. Do you have any advice or for aspiring startup founders that are looking to do something that's game changing like you have? You've successfully raised over $100 million in funding from the likes of Bill Gates. I mean, that is an incredible accomplishment. Any words of wisdom for others that may be trying to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, of course. So I think the biggest thing that I would encourage, especially technology-centric founders, to internalize is you need to listen to the market and to your customers, and that needs to come first. So we often have companies that we call technology push versus market pull, and technology push refers to, hey, I have this technology and I'm going to try and find a home for it. And then you have market pull companies that, hey, we have a customer problem. What might be the right solution or the right technology to solve that customer or that ecosystem problem? And I'm really proud to say that it took us a long time to find our home in the latter camp, but we got there. And I think we're really thriving because of that. And that's something that Looking back on myself when I started this, I wish I could tell myself that. The second element of this too for founders is make sure you have a appreciation for the fields that aren't your own. One of the things that I see a lot is, especially, I manage a team of 45 scientists and engineers, is they often have a bit of disdain or skepticism for finance folks or sales folks or government relations people or, the PR and comms people or, even the CEO. And I think that's a shame, right? The best solutions are always interdisciplinary, and you need that interdisciplinary collaboration to work. And so no matter what field you're in, right, if you're in finance, I encourage you to get an understanding of the engineering basics in your field. What are the right orders of magnitude of numbers? How does the product work? How does the system work? What are the competitive systems? If you're in engineering, understand the basics of time value of money. What does that even mean, right? Or what is the term unit economics refer to? And these are all pretty straightforward concepts, but a lot of people don't take the time to learn them. And so my advice to founders is, hey, when you're going to do, when you build your company, make sure that you as a founder and all of your people understand that the whole company has to work together. Otherwise, nothing's going to work.
That's great advice. Listening to the market, right? And we see so many companies out there calling that the hammer's looking for nails, right? And it's listen to what the market is asking for, and then clearly working together and collaborating, absolutely important. From team sports to building companies, right? So absolutely, great advice. Now, last question here, Max. The U.S. Department of Energy announced $7 billion in funding to launch 7 regional clean hydrogen hubs late last year. The Pacific Northwest was selected amongst them. What has you most excited about the trends you're seeing within the region locally, and at the global scale?
Yeah, so I think personally, one of the things that's most exciting is that for the first time in many years, the United States became what other countries perceive as a major leader in hydrogen policy and hydrogen infrastructure development, and eclipsed Europe, eclipsed Japan, eclipsed Australia. And it's really impressive and exciting. And I think that's generated a lot of momentum. So I'm super excited about that. I'm also super excited to see kind of the tail end of the market in terms of financing. The big financiers are now starting to lean in, because what they're seeing is, hey, the government has made a policy that this is probably going to happen in some way, shape, or form. We want to lean in and be at the forefront of that. And so a lot of the financiers are actually leaning into this. And what that means is that there's now going to be an economic driver in addition to just kind of like a technology, a hype cycle driver. And I think that's really important and really valuable for the staying power industry. So ultimately, I think a lot of us see the government's role as, hey, we're going to help catalyze this industry, but we're not going to be ultimately the ones who sustain it. Maybe we'll get people kind of over that initial hump, but once they're there, everybody else has to kind of participate and do their part. And to me, what I find very exciting is that the big financiers, the big banks, the big project finance companies are actually seeing this and are actually kind of picking their heads up and starting to lean in. And I've been talking to a lot of them about that, and there's a lot of excitement. So I'm really hopeful that ultimately that drives sustainability of this industry in more ways than one, right? Lower CO2, but also staying power of a hydrogen industry and hydrogen ecosystem, because it is a good clean fuel. But ultimately, we've had kind of false starts with hydrogen as a major clean fuel in the past. So I'm seeing a lot of things with government support, financier support. Kind of the technology is a lot more mature than it was in previous kind of waves of hydrogen hype, like in the early 2000s and then one before that. And so I'm optimistic that we have some staying power and we're going to make a difference on climate change. Yeah,
it's incredibly exciting. It's a very exciting time. So we're at time here, Max. What's the best way for listeners to learn more about you, Modern Hydrogen, and how to get in contact with you or your team if they wanted to?
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. You can find our company at modernhydrogen.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Max. This is it's such a pivotal and exciting time for sustainable solutions and clean tech, at a global scale, as we just talked about. Thank you and the team at Modern Hydrogen for your passion and your technological contributions, for such an important cause. And for everybody, thank you for joining us. Please join us for our next episode of Wheels Up, Future of Flight, as we explore today's dynamic industry with distinguished visionaries, change makers, policy creators, and the innovative ideas that are cultivating new frontiers across aviation, space, and defense. Until next time. Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Alex. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To capture all the latest from Wheels Up, Future of Flight, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes or visit us at collineargroup.com.